The battle had ended hours ago, yet the ground still trembled with the echoes of machines retreating and the screams of those who had not escaped in time. Smoke drifted low, curling around shattered stone and twisted metal. She lay there, half buried in the dirt, her side burning from a wound too deep to ignore. Around her, silence grew heavier than the clash of war had been, silence broken only by the rasp of her own breath. She lifted her head once, just enough to see the silhouettes of her clan moving in the distance. For one fragile heartbeat, she thought they would return, that her blood and her years of loyalty meant enough for them to lift her from the ground. But no one came back. They did not look for her. They did not even slow their steps. Her people had always said weakness was a curse. An injured warrior was not a comrade but a burden, a shadow dragging down the strength of the whole. It was not cruelty, they said, it was survival. Yet knowing their creed did nothing to soften the blade now pressed against her heart. Watching them abandon her tore deeper than any wound. She had fought beside them, bled beside them, sworn oaths that bound her very soul, and now, when her blood ran freely into the dirt, those oaths were nothing. Their silhouettes grew smaller, merging with the smoke until they were gone. The battlefield claimed her. She was alone. The pain throbbed with each heartbeat, dull at first, then sharp enough to steal her breath. She pressed her claws to the wound, but her strength slipped like water between her fingers. Bodies lay scattered around her, human and alien alike, silent testaments to the price of pride and the cost of war. Some faces she recognized. Others were strangers. All were the same now, still, broken, claimed by earth and ash. She wondered if this was honor, this lonely surrender to the soil. Was this the glory her clan praised when they sang of death in battle? To her it felt less like glory and more like betrayal, a quiet erasure of everything she had ever been. A bitter wind stirred the battlefield, lifting strands of her hair across her eyes. She let them fall, too weary to brush them away. Her body trembled with fever as bloodlust deepened its grip. Still she tried to rise, a last desperate effort to prove her worth, to drag herself even a few steps closer to where her clan had vanished. Her legs betrayed her, folding beneath her weight. The ground met her face with a dull impact, and for the first time, she realized she would never stand again. She would never wield her weapon, never speak her name in defiance, never look her clan in the eye. To them, she was already dead. The sun dipped low, turning the haze into fire. She closed her eyes against its glare, her chest shuddering with every failing breath. A strange calm crept over her, not peace but resignation. If death was to claim her, she would not fight it. She had nothing left to fight for. She thought of the songs her people sang around fires, songs of loyalty, kinship, unity. Each lyric mocked her now, each verse a reminder that bonds shattered when tested by weakness. Her clan had spoken of eternity, yet they had abandoned her in a single moment. Her hand slipped from the wound, blood soaking the soil beneath her. Darkness thickened at the edges of her sight. She listened for the steps of carrion feeders, the wings of scavengers, the whisper of death itself. Nothing came. The silence pressed harder, heavy enough to crush her will. She wondered if even the earth rejected her, if even death found her unworthy. With the last flicker of thought, she offered a prayer not to her gods, not to her clan, but to the nameless night, let it end quickly. As the final light faded, she surrendered. The world could take her. There was no one left who would care, no one who would remember, no one who would return. Her clan had left her on the battlefield, and she was already fading, another shadow among the countless lost. The night dragged on with the chill of death creeping closer, but another presence stirred among the wreckage. A human medic moved carefully between fallen bodies, searching for signs of life. His pack was almost empty, his hands raw from hours of work, and still he pressed forward. The groans of his comrades drew his attention first, but when his light fell across her broken frame, he paused. She was no ally. Her armor was marked with the colors of the enemy, her weapons scattered by her side. Everything in his training told him to pass her by. His orders were unspoken but absolute: save your own, leave the rest. Yet he crouched, studying her labored breaths. Blood loss had brought her to the edge, and by every rule of war, she was already condemned. He should have walked away. But he didn't. Something inside refused to accept that life could be divided so simply into friend or foe. He had spent years binding wounds, dragging the half-dead back into light, and he could not ignore that same spark fading in her eyes. He steadied her head and checked the wound with quick, practiced hands. The injury was bad, deep, jagged, tearing through muscle, but not beyond hope. He muttered under his breath, words meant only for himself, words that had carried him through too many nights like this. No one dies on my watch. He pulled out his last bandages, rationed antiseptic, and worked with precision, ignoring the tremor in his hands. Every motion was defiance, against exhaustion, against orders, against the cold logic of war. She stirred faintly, consciousness brushing the edge of her pain. When her gaze locked onto him, confusion clouded her expression. Enemy. Stranger. He should have been her executioner. Instead, he was the only thing standing between her and the grave. Her breathing slowed, steadied under his efforts. He whispered reassurance she could not understand, his voice low and steady, the kind of tone that had kept countless soldiers anchored to life. The weight of the battlefield pressed in on him, explosions fading in the distance, the moans of those he could not reach, but he stayed with her, shielding her from the cold, willing her to hold on. Hours blurred together. His supplies dwindled to scraps, his own strength fraying with every heartbeat. Yet when dawn's first light broke over the horizon, she was still alive. Pale, weak, trembling, but alive. Against every expectation, against the indifference of her clan and the brutality of war, she endured. She watched him with dim eyes that could not hide her disbelief. Her people had left her without hesitation. He, sworn enemy, had refused to let her go. It made no sense, not to her, not to the way she had been raised. But the truth was undeniable, she lived because he would not abandon her. The hours that followed blurred into a fragile rhythm of pain and silence. She drifted in and out of awareness, every breath dragging her between the weight of her wounds and the strange reality that she still lived. Each time her eyes opened, the same figure remained nearby, the human medic who had denied her death. His hands were steady even when his face sagged with exhaustion, his presence constant when everything else had abandoned her. She tried to reconcile what she saw with what she believed. Her clan had cast her aside without hesitation, yet this human, her enemy, had risked his own safety to keep her heart beating. Her throat was dry, voice raw, but at last she forced out a question in halting words, demanding to know why. His gaze lifted, meeting hers without hesitation. He spoke plainly, without grand speeches or dramatic vows. He told her that life mattered, that every life carried weight beyond flags or bloodlines, and that no uniform or crest could erase the value of a heartbeat. To him, saving her was no different than saving one of his own. His tone held no anger, no triumph, only conviction. She listened, struggling against the ache in her chest, and for the first time in her life, she doubted the teachings carved into her from childhood. Her people had drilled into her that weakness was shame, that abandonment was necessity, that mercy was poison. Yet here was proof of another way, a man who held nothing to gain by sparing her, who acted out of something stronger than tradition or creed. The days passed slowly as he tended her. He rationed food, shared water, and kept her sheltered when storms rolled across the ruined field. She found herself watching him, not out of suspicion anymore, but curiosity. Each choice he made baffled her, small kindnesses she would never have expected in war. He gave her warmth when she shivered, patience when she faltered, reassurance when fear crept into her eyes. Each gesture carved away at the bitterness left by her clan's betrayal. In quiet moments, she spoke of the oaths her people demanded and the songs of honor they had sung before battle. Her voice cracked when she admitted the hollow truth of those promises. The human listened without judgment, offering no mockery, only understanding. Then he spoke of his own kind, of how they fought not only for victory but for one another, how the measure of a soldier was not in how many enemies they cut down but in how many comrades they brought home alive. She did not understand all his words, but the meaning was clear enough. His people valued something hers had discarded, loyalty that did not break under strain. Trust began as a fragile thread between them, thin and unsteady, but each day it grew stronger. She no longer saw him as enemy, nor did he treat her as one. Instead, they were two souls bound together by survival, sharing truths neither could ignore. For her, the revelation was bitter yet freeing. The honor she had lived by was a cage, and the compassion he carried was the key she had never known existed. Still, danger lingered at the edge of every moment. Patrols passed close enough that they both held their breath, and she knew if his superiors discovered her, his kindness would cost him everything. Yet he did not falter, even knowing the risk. He chose to shield her, as if her life was worth defying the very world around him. She could not deny the truth any longer. One night, as the stars glimmered faintly beyond the smoke, she swore a vow in a whisper. Not to her clan, not to the gods who had watched her fall, but to the man who had refused to let her die. She vowed that his act would not be forgotten, that his defiance would live within her, shaping the path she chose when her strength returned. Dawn came heavy with the sound of distant engines and the tramp of boots across the broken earth. The medic had kept her hidden through the night, but the reprieve could not last. Patrols swept closer, voices sharp against the morning air. He readied his pack, urging her to move though her body still trembled with weakness. Every step was agony, yet she forced herself upright, leaning on his arm as they slipped through the ruins. The risk of discovery grew with each heartbeat, and for the first time since the battle, she felt the pull of strength returning, not from her clan, not from honor, but from the stubborn will of the man beside her. The enemy patrol cut off their escape, soldiers raising weapons, orders barked in harsh tones. She staggered forward, shielding the medic without thought. Weak as she was, instinct drove her to stand between him and death. When the first shot rang out, she drew on reserves she did not know remained, fighting not for her abandoned clan but for the human who had given her life back. Side by side they struggled, her strikes clumsy yet fierce, his hands steady as he guided her through the chaos. Against all odds, they broke free, leaving the patrol scattered in the dust. When silence returned, they collapsed together, breathing hard. Blood soaked her bandages anew, and exhaustion blurred her vision, but her heart pounded with something more than survival. She looked at him, the medic who had no reason to risk himself, who had fought to shield her when no bond demanded it. The words rose unbidden, raw with truth. Her people had abandoned her in the name of honor, but she had found it here, in him, in the refusal to surrender a life simply because it was inconvenient. He pressed fresh cloth to her wound, shaking his head at her stubbornness, but there was pride in his eyes. He told her what humanity believed, that loyalty was not measured by strength alone, that courage meant holding on when every rule said to let go. His words sank into her like fire, burning away the shame her clan had left behind. She swore quietly, a vow forged not from bloodlines but from choice. Whatever paths lay ahead, she would carry this act within her. She would not forget that when her own people cast her aside, a human held her hand against the dark and refused to let her die. The battlefield still raged beyond the horizon, but within her, something greater stirred. The medic rose, offering his hand to help her up. She took it without hesitation. Together they walked from the ruins, two figures scarred but unbroken, bound not by duty or clan but by the defiance of one man who chose compassion over cruelty. For the first time since the war began, she believed in a future beyond betrayal.